continues whether I'm in it or not, and I will come back in regardless.
Okay, awesome. I have also been, it took me 2 tries to get into this meeting alone. So
Awesome.
if I disappear, I'd be surprised if the talk continues going, but cool. We'll get started then if you're okay with that.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a few students and we are glad to see you all. If you have questions, you can type them in the chat. You can see the chat, right, Brenton?
I certainly can. Although if you do have a burning question, please feel free to call out. I'll be looking at the chat periodically. There's also plenty of time afterwards that we can dive into, some more questions.
Yeah, and I will perhaps shout them out if they put them in the chat, because I know often the students are very shy and they don't want to
I
say
don't bite.
hello.
I promise. I mean, I can't, but I also don't bite.
Yeah, so no need to be afraid. Cool.
Um,
Okay.
awesome.
Yeah, go right
Hopefully you
ahead.
can see my screen,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
wonderful title. Cool. So I'll get started then. First of all, my name is Brenton Adey. I'm a senior data analytics consultant at Telstra Purple. We're a big tech consultancy, mainly doing a whole bunch of different things about software development, all the way through to your traditional adaptive infrastructure. Me personally, I'm obviously sitting in the data analytics space with a huge passion for artificial intelligence and machine learning. So much so that I burdened myself with doing my master's. So I'm currently a master's student at Deakin University as well, studying applied artificial intelligence, although I don't think it will be applied AI in the sense that we'll be talking about it today. I also teach the data analytics bootcamp at the University of Western Australia through edX as well. So I'm not sure how many of you are also data nerds like me, but if you're looking for a way to get started, I will always talk about data. But I've left it on the screen long enough, I think now. You might be looking at that, even the title of this talk, and going, what the hell is a PowerPoint AI? Surely it's just a trick, right? Just a play on words. And we will get to it. There is just one disclaimer before we get started. Who doesn't love a talk with a disclaimer at the start of it? This isn't actually a talk about PowerPoint. If you joined this one hoping for the latest tips and tricks for creating flashy slide decks and all of those fun things, that comes next week. But firstly, I'm profoundly sorry, and maybe the meeting description could have alleviated that. What we're really going to be talking about today is the basics concept of AI, or more specifically, we're going to talk about one avenue we use to get to AI, which is machine learning. We're going to break that down into its fundamental components and then see how we can apply it to something a bit out there like a PowerPoint. And I'll leave it as an exercise for everyone at the end of this to see whether I'm crazy or not. Unrelated, this is me as a robot. Somehow it seemed like the most relevant picture to have on the topic of AI. I've always been a little fixated on pushing the boundaries of a concept. When I was young, we had this science project where we had to build a model car that could travel the furthest with or without certain motors, etc., like that. But it was a stipulation that it couldn't be battery powered. Most kids went with some combination of elastic bands and gravity, etc. I won by adding a solar panel power motor with the stipulation that the sun isn't a battery, and I guess technically with conservation and energy and all that, all cars are using it just relatively inefficiently. The sun's not exactly a limited resource. And I never really grew out of this. I think it greatly contributed to my love of mathematics and then later data science. When I started learning about machine learning and AI, it was all under the guise of really obtuse language and quite complicated mathematics. And I felt this to be a little bit disingenuous. Smart people often enjoy disguising simple fundamental concepts in complex jargon because it makes them feel better for being the ones who understood it when smarter people taught them the same way. Fundamentally, though, machine learning and the algorithms behind it are actually pretty simple. The term AI floats around a lot these days, especially with ChatGPT and all those models coming into popularity. It's usually some ex machina style magic to solve all of the world's problems, which is for me is exciting because it means I get to dance around pretending I'm some Chris Angel in my day job analyzing data. But a magician never reveals his secrets, and here I'm hoping to take you behind the curtain a little bit and see how simple machine learning and AI really are, and how applicable it is to so many different scenarios. Some of you might have some background in machine learning or even data science in general. But you might know that if we're going to talk about AI, there's just something that we can't avoid talking about, and that's maths. That's right. I tricked everyone here into a lecture on complex linear algebra, repetitive mathematics, ruling equations. Except we don't actually need to talk about maths to talk about machine learning. So those of you who sort of felt that rush of blood leaving your head just from the mere mention of maths can relax just a little bit. But if we're not going to talk about maths, then how are we going to talk about machine learning? And definitely how are we even going to try and apply it to something like a PowerPoint? Well, if you were to look at our friend Wikipedia, you would get the current quote. Machine learning algorithms build a model based on sample data, known as training data, in order to make predictions or decisions without being explicitly programmed to do so. And that without being explicitly programmed to do so is important. So we'll keep it in the back of our mind. But this is a wild new innovation, right? It's coming into the news quite recently, trying to make a model that's making predictions, a computer that thinks for itself. Except this quote is often attributed to Arthur Samuel in 1952. Arthur Samuel was a pioneer of machine learning in IBM. He built a system to play checkers right back around 1949. But okay, then, that's just one example. By technicality, I guess it still is machine learning. What about the stuff about neural networks, computer vision, trying to get a computer to think or behave like a human brain? Surely that's new, right? Here's a schematic of what we call the Mark I perceptron, and it was the initial machine learning algorithm used to mimic the workings of the actual human brain, and it was constructed for image recognition in 1957. So though a lot of the architectures and the amount of compute that we can run these things have increased, it's this exact fundamental concept that was responsible for the resurgence of neural networks in the 1990s. And now it's later what is the building blocks for some of the autoencoders and transformers that we see build the foundations of a lot of the machine learning algorithms that we are popular. So before we go on to explaining how machine learning works and how we can apply it to PowerPoint, it's important to note that machine learning is not only for big data. It's not only for large scale compute. And it's definitely not magic. That's all what machine learning is not. So let's talk about what machine learning is. When I started this many moons ago, I wanted to find a way to demonstrate this in an environment that was so restrictive and so dead simple that I couldn't hide behind all of that maths and linear algebra, that multivariate calculus that I find so comfortable. And then it came to me. What about a PowerPoint? Machine learning is a way of constructing a model that describes things about the real world without us having to program at every explicit detail. That's what I mentioned was sort of the defining factor of the definition of machine learning. In a way, it's about transferring knowledge from the known to the unknown. And we do this type of learning all the time in our real lives, and so much so that it's almost second nature. For me, for example, I spent a lot of my younger years trying to learn the guitar, and it was probably time I should have spent on my hair, but that's the sacrifices we make. Until it came to one day in high school when they were auditioning for the orchestra musical. And there was about, I don't know, 5 or 6 people lined up to the part of the guitar, but no one was lined up for the bass part. And I thought, how hard can it be moving from 6 strings to 4? And anyone on this call who has tried that will know that, or won't be surprised when I tell you my first audition absolutely bombed, and so did my subsequent performances. So even though there are transferable skills between learning to play the guitar and learning to play the bass, they both have strings, they both have frets, they both make similar sounds. It was only after successive iterations of failing and practicing that I was able to transfer those skills into a new context. Transfer my skills of playing the guitar into playing the bass after iterations and iterations of practice. Another way about this transferring of knowledge from the known to the unknown is, say we had a group of people and they were tasked with predicting the result of a coin flip. For every correct guess, we'll say that they get a cookie. And this is just to avoid the people who won't take this very serious experiment seriously. Without prior knowledge, except for the fact that maybe a coin has 2 sides, I think we can agree that with a certain margin of error, 50% of the group would get it right and end up with a cookie. If we were to run this experiment without telling any more information, we'll see the current results. 1 flip turns up heads. 2 flips, heads. A 3rd flip, and heads. And some in the group might say, what a coincidence, and others might catch on with the pattern. 4 flips, heads again. 5 flips, turns up heads. And the group might start getting suspicious, and cookies are flying left and right. Given enough time, people can learn the ploy, that it's no ordinary coin. The group started somewhere around here, guessing 50-50%. That's just random chance of guessing heads or tails. But with successive coin flips and the promise of cookies getting ever more enticing, a group can learn of the coin's true nature, something they weren't explicitly told, but through sequences of different trials can understand that maybe the coin's always going to turn up heads, because if it's turned up heads 5 times, 6 times, 7 times, 8 times in a row, it's becoming more and more likely that it is just a 2-headed coin. We don't need to tell that explicit information, but it can be learned from those successive iterations. So let's try and formalize this process just a little bit more. Although there are many types of machine learning that you may have heard of, supervised, unsupervised, reinforcement, semi-supervised, they all follow the same 3 basic steps. Create a test. We need to define what the model is trying to do. Next, we need to define a way to score the test. How do we tell if a model is good or bad at what it's meant to be doing? And lastly, we need to find a way to punish or reward the model for the score that it received. The idea here is if we take these fundamental components of what a machine learning algorithm is, stripping away all the maths and complexity that we use to try and apply these, we can find ways to implement it in something simple, like a PowerPoint. And we're going to need to know what these exactly mean and how to implement them if we're going to build it from the ground up. Just another note on machine learning. The aim of machine learning, as opposed to something like plain old statistics, is to generate a generalizable model. It's something that we can apply to never before seen data, maybe gain some insight into a general pattern, or generate an adaptive behavior. Maybe it's predicting the occurrence of a disease, or grouping a set of tourists together in a way that sells the most t-shirts. Or maybe it's creating the best goddamn cat video of all times. These problems are vague, but humans learn to do it through years of medical study, years of user experience surveys, and years of computer science study, respectively. In machine learning, we look for the answer in the data that we have by following the 3 steps: test, score, and then punish or reward, much like a student would prepare for an exam. So indulge me for a minute while we go through metaphor lane. We'll open up Brenton School of Machine Learning Studies. Here we have students working day in, day out to produce results. In this metaphor, our school is the model and students are just instances of training the model. just like flipping a coin was instances of training our group of people to know the double-sided coin. To get this school to learn and perform in some of the top schools, we first need to define a test, some sort of standardized test like a NAPLAN or a WACE exam for those of us in WA. This test is what we'll use to judge how well the school performs. And when we conduct a test, each student will run it and get a score. And we'll say that our school score is just some aggregation of all the students' score. After we define the test, we need to define what it means to pass or fail this test. What does it mean for a student in our school to do well in this test? What's a good score? What's a bad score for a school? What will end in us losing our funding and turning off the lights forever? Lastly, and importantly, we need to define how we're going to punish the students who have failed and reward those who passed. Again, this is a standardized test, and our school will be judged based off the average score. So we want to have the maximum amount of students passing by whatever means necessary. Once we do this many, many times, each time, hopefully the students are getting punished or rewarded on their test and getting better. It's important to note that the students are the one learning after each go at the test. They are what makes the machine learning school a machine learning model. We have no way to control the school as a whole. Anyone who's had any trying to wrangle any amount of kids at any age will know that that's just impossible. But we can punish or reward the individual students after each go of their test. You might say that another way to approach this is by getting all the students to memorize the answers beforehand. And sure, that will get a good result in the long run, but I mean the short term, but in the long run, it becomes a little bit harder. Say, for example, the curriculum changes, and now all of a sudden you've got a whole nother set of questions that students have to memorize, because otherwise they won't know the answers to those. It's not adaptable in that way. Secondly, I don't know about you, but I've never been able to memorize more than about a handful of things. So it becomes harder and harder the bigger our test is to start coding those informations into our students. See, you can run a test on any model, but if there exists no way to punish or reward parts of the model based on the test score, then it's not a machine learning model. It's only those 3 steps in conjunction that define a machine learning model. So that's our trip down metaphor lane. We can come back out into the real world. We're going to talk about a real world example called the MNIST dataset. This is often called the hello world of computer vision. This dataset contains 60,000 training and 10,000 testing labeled handwritten digits. The name of this game is to generate a model that can classify an unseen handwritten digit as 0 through to 9. So our test is pretty simple. Is the predicted digit equal to the actual labeled digit? Our first go of a model might just be as simple as this, just a random guess. And it's about as simple as we can get. We guess a number between 0 and 9, and we just assign our output of our model to be that. And we can test this model quite easily. In fact, if we were, we'd find that it's about 10% accurate. 1 in 10 times, we just so happen to guess the right digit. It's much like guessing 50-50 on a coin toss. However, we have no ability to change the model's behavior when it gets things right, and we can't alter it when it gets things wrong. So our model is not a machine learning model. We might try a different approach. The next model we might try is one that relates the digit number to how dark the image is, which might seem a bit strange at first, but we would expect the example of a handwritten digit 8 to be a lot darker than a handwritten digit of a 7, or maybe which is slightly darker than image of a 1. In practice, this model's accuracy averages to about 22%, which is twice as good as just guessing, so it's definitely an improvement. But we have no way to alter the model's behavior when it gets things wrong or gets things right, just like in the last example. So this model is also not a machine learning model. So I think we can do better than that. Let's look at an actual example of just some machine learning model, see how those 3 steps apply to it. Here's an extract from a book that I dearly love and I would sincerely recommend if you're interested in the inner workings of some machine learning algorithms called Neural Networks and Deep Learning by Michael Nielsen. Don't bother trying to read the code on the screen. Importantly, what I want to do is to highlight something that this model has, which the other 2 models didn't. A way to reward good test scores and punish bad ones. For those interested, the key magic is what we call a feed-forward and backpropagation approach of a neural network. Critically, this takes the output of a cost function, how different is our prediction from the expected, then alters it to favor the correct part of the guess and punish the bad parts. This is done through a process of stochastic gradient descent, which really, when you break it down, is quite simple because it just involves the chain rule when you're multiplying matrices and deriving and stuff. But except I did say no maths. The important thing here is that the neural network model described in the book is a machine learning model because it has a test. Is the predicted digit equal to the actual labeled digit? It has a way of determining a good and bad score, which I've called the cost function. And then it has a way of altering the model's behavior. This is through stochastic gradient descent in this case. So that's in the MNIST example. In it, we had pretty typical cases. We had a good, clear test. We had a labeled objective. If our model didn't meet the actual label, then it wasn't going to work. I'm just going to check if anyone's put any questions. Cool. The interesting examples in the industry are when the test isn't so clear and this good or bad score isn't so clear. See, labeling digits is pretty easy, but what about something a little bit harder? Here I'm going to talk about another paper that's quite interesting I came across on sets and frames, dual objective piano scription. In this paper, effectively, the authors were trying to look at transcribing recorded piano audio into written music or manuscript. In this paper that is full of fun maths and data science jargon, but the point of interest is when the authors try to describe how they tested the model's accuracy for velocity. So they state in the abstract that it's a pretty hard nut to crack because sure, you can tell if a note written on paper is the same as the note that was played. You can even test whether the transcribed note falls on the right beat. These are codifiable, quantifiable ways to represent a note. But how do you capture dynamics and volume and expression? A note pitch is a note pitch, but what reference does a note's loudness have? Who's to say that the recording isn't just loud or that there's too much background noise? Additionally, how do you give the correct note's volume when the context it appears in is arguably more important? A sequence of really, really soft notes is a lot different to a really, really loud note followed by a soft note. And I love academic papers sometimes because the authors are very hand wavy at this point. The final mapping is arbitrary. They've said that they found and discovered a never before seen method to truly test whether their model perfectly transcribes the dynamics on the player. However, it's important to note that all that's been done is some math magic to calculate the score based on the average volume of the recording. They didn't necessarily discover some intrinsic property of volume and expression that can be measured. They simply defined a test and worked with those constraints to build it into the model. Their test could have easily been all notes of the correct volume if they are -5 decibels. And then the model would have been really good at learning to transcribe all notes as -5 decibels and express the expressions accordingly. So that's about the test, when the test is a bit more ambiguous. But what about the score? Because I glossed over the score before. I said it was just some aggregation of all the students' scores. But let's take a step back and be a little bit more rigorous because we are all becoming mathematicians now. A score is a number or some value that we try and use to capture how good the model is. Let's say, for example, that you're looking to classify cyber attacks. Cybersecurity has been on my mind recently since the Optus breach and all the fun work that that led to. Here is machine learning methods for cybersecurity intrusion detection, data sets, and comparative study, which is a lofty title, but effectively it was a paper trying to analyze all of the different cybersecurity data sets with a whole bunch of different machine learning algorithms to try and figure out which one would be the best in terms of what data sets are available to us and how to apply machine learning algorithms to you. But needless to say, I don't think I need to reiterate that cyber attacks are bad. To protect ourselves, we want to wade through incoming traffic and pick out the likely attacks. This is what we call an intrusion detection system. And sometimes we can call them the intrusion prevention system if we actually try and act on them. But hiring a grad to wade through incoming traffic or to code up every single rule that could possibly categorize a attack as part of traffic is kind of inhuman. So instead, you might hire a grad to build a model to classify these attacks instead. In the paper, there are 5 types of attacks described. And your first thought on how to calculate performance might be to count how many the model got right and then average the total number of points. And you'd be talking about accuracy, which is a really common metric for calculating performance. However, the issue in our case in this specific domain is that uh, attacks are actually quite infrequent in terms of traffic coming in and out. Say, for example, I had 500 instances of normal traffic, 20 of denial of service attacks, 10 probing, and then 5 of the other 2. If I had a model that predicts all traffic coming through as normal, I could get 93% accuracy. But I'm just letting every attack go by. Yes, it's technically accurate, but it's clearly not performant. Accuracy is what we say not robust to this class imbalance. Also, there may be repercussions on labeling something that isn't an attack, what we call a false positive, or labeling something that is an attack as normal, what we call a false negative. And in this case, it's pretty bad to let an attack go through, but mislabeling normal traffic can usually be sent to our security operations center to deal with, provided we don't send them too much stuff. Importantly, though, this trade-off that we're talking about depends on the domain. In healthcare, we've done stuff where the trade-off between sensitivity and specificity is quite important. Yes, we don't want to miss people with an illness, but we also don't want patients going through potentially really invasive and unnecessary treatment. Instead, we can use other scores, such as recall, what proportion of attacks that we got right, and precision, what proportion of traffic that we identified as attacks were actually attacks. And you can see back in the paper a huge difference between the accuracy of their models and the precision and recall. Here we have to think about what's important when we're trying to select a score. Is it how many we got right, or is it that we're actually capturing the attacks correctly? And this is just in the classification example for sure. There's definitely plenty of other types of scores and not just for classification. Let's say, for example, we had a AI that was trying to generate a behavior in a robot navigating a room. Is the score that we're trying to reward the behavior of the robot minimizing the number of bumps, or is it how much square meters that it covered? The important thing to recognize is that each score is trying to distill the model as a whole, the whole behavior of the model into a bite-sized chunk. So there's bound to be trade-offs there. When we're building these machine learning models and considering the different aspects that we can apply to them, we still have to think about how we're defining the test, how we score it, and how we provide punishment or reward. When it all comes down to it, these are the 3 main parts of the machine learning algorithm that we have to consider. So I'm just going to take a little breath. This was a long build up, but it's important to understand that in order to apply these to something silly like a PowerPoint, then we need to understand that those 3 components are what we're going to use. It's not about the maths, it's not about the complex compute, but it's about trying to define the algorithm which we're going to use. Hopefully by now it's clear that machine learning is more than just classification and regression algorithms or things that you import, libraries that you import through Python or R. Machine learning can be used in all other applications as long as you use these three principles. And if you don't believe me, then this is why we're here, training an AI to play tic tac toe. Except when I was thinking about this, I wasn't quite sure that that would convince people, right? This is meant to try and convince people that machine learning algorithms is just as simple as any other algorithm. But who's to say I'm not just going to do some fancy calculations in the back end and hide that from everyone if I'm just building an AI to play tic tac toe? So I think this would do a better job. I mentioned our friend Arthur Samuel way back at the beginning, who spent a large part of his career utilizing the best IBM computers at the time to create revolutionary machine learning programs to play checkers. And I wonder what he'd think if he saw his life's work reduced to a slide deck. Very quickly, who those need a refresher, tic-tac-toe, or noughts and crosses, as I heard it being called, is a two-player game played on a 3x3 grid. Each player is assigned to be either a cross or a knot, a circle, and each turn they mark where they want to place their symbol. The winner of the game is to get 3 in a row. If neither player gets 3 in a row, then it's considered a draw. It's no chess, but I like to think it's the simplicity that gives it its charm. And like any good consultant, I'm just going to spend some moments with some few caveats and really define the scope of what we're trying to work with here. So the aim of the game is to demonstrate that machine learning is no more complicated than any other algorithm once it's stripped down to its fundamentals. So no code is allowed. Full disclosure, there were some VBA macros involved. As you'll soon see, to get this working involved many slides and many animations. So to save myself an eternity, I just hacked away some old VBA scripts to automate the insertion of animations and slides. Importantly, we would not be using these in the process of training our PowerPoint AI. It's just there to set up the initial conditions, but it's not going to be considered to be used to implement any sort of functionality when we're training the PowerPoint AI. Secondly, for the game theorists on the call, depending on how you define a game, there are about 255,168 possible games of tic-tac-toe. So to narrow this down, I've reduced the problem to training a PowerPoint to win in 3 moves. In tic-tac-toe specifically, a lot of the games end in a neutral outcome, that is, neither player wins. So reducing the problem to winning in the first 3 moves actually doesn't stop. It actually contains a lot more of the winning and losing states than if you just consider all of them in terms of proportion. In addition, the AI will always make the first move and in a corner. And where possible, we will utilize reflections and rotations so that a computer will never make a move that is a reflection or rotation of another state. What do I mean by that? I mean, in this example, the AI technically has the choice to move to 5 different locations. But in reality, it'll only ever be able to move into 3 of these locations. And that's because the other 2 available locations are just a mirror image of the left ones. Cool. Us human players will have no such restrictions and we'll be allowed to place a knot wherever possible. I don't know if it's worth mentioning, but I just decided that humans would be noughts and AI would be crosses. If anyone has any strong feelings on that, please feel free to contact me afterwards. Even with all of those restrictions, this still leaves us with a not tiny number of 1,830 possible game states. Briefly as well, I want to talk about some of the inspiration that came from this. The first was the work by a mathematician and comedian, because there are some of us who are funny, by the name of Matthew Parker, who ran a project on training a machine learning algorithm to play tic-tac-toe with a set of matchboxes. And this was based off Donald Mickey's work from 1961. Mickey's model was made of 304 matchboxes, and each matchbox represented a single state of the tic-tac-toe board. You might see the discrepancy there between 304 and 1,830. Mickey only had to worry about the AI moves that he was capturing. And he also didn't have to capture all of the moves beforehand, which we'll get into because he used a pencil, I think it's called. Anyway, inside the matchbox, there's a set of colored beads. And each bead represents the chance to move to a particular location on the board. So when it came time for the AI to move, an operator would close their eyes, open up the box, and pick out a random bead. If the bead was red in this example, then that would indicate that the AI is moving to the rightmost middle right square. The theory is that the more beads in the box, the greater the chance that the operator will pick that color and the greater chance the AI will make that move. Each time the AI won, more beads would be placed in the boxes that led it to win. So for example, if going orange, red, and purple meant that it would end in a winning state, then operator would go back to each one of those boxes and place in the respective colors. So purple, red, and orange. The more beads of that particular color that were in that box, when it got to the same state, it'd have a greater chance of making the winning move. What results from repetitions and repetitions of doing that is a set of 304 matchboxes that practically only contain beads that move the AI into winning moves. The operator will never pick out a bead that will make an AI make a mistake because there's no colored beads there. Every time it picked those beads and subsequently lost, it'd be punished by getting those colored beads removed. Mickey's work was one of the earliest versions of what we would come to call reinforcement learning. But it's just a typical example of how we might build a machine learning algorithm with matchboxes. One of the inspirations. The second inspiration was Great Impractical Ideas in Computer Science, PowerPoint Programming by Tom Waldehane, which is a fascinating video, which please, if you've got time after this, have some fun, maybe with some popcorn and some fun. PowerPoint then. I've heard on the streets that some people are under the false impression that PowerPoint is not the greatest tool ever invented, and I'm shocked. I mean, PowerPoint has everything that you could possibly want in a programming language. It has text, it has shapes, but most importantly, it has animations. It might seem silly, but the shapes and animations are actually the key that allow us to form a real machine learning model with PowerPoint because they allow us to do something that developers take for granted every day: state management. In our model, each slide will represent a particular move from either the player or the AI. We will then plan to use shapes and animations to manage the state of each board, to remember what they learn. So for those playing along at home, that's 1,830 states, which means 1,830 slides. Each slide state will consist of the following: the board, that is the number of noughts and crosses and their relative positions. PowerPoint is a great programming language because it comes with an inbuilt interface. Included in the state is also the previous steps. That is the previous moves that were made to get to the current board play. And that will come into consideration when we talk about the process of learning. And we do that through one of my favorite PowerPoint features, zoom transitions. This way, we can backtrack and backpropagate through every state that it was previously by just clicking a simple transition. So that's the state. We've got the current play and we've got all the previous ones, but how do we move from one state to another? To be specific, there are two different types of turns. There's a player's turn and an AI's turn. For the player, there's a collection of shapes that represent the chance to place a nought and navigate to the relevant slide. That is, that every click on an empty space is actually a click onto an invisible, no fill, no outline shape that navigates the player to a new slide. And that new slide just so happens to be where the nought is located. So in this example, there are 9 invisible blank rectangles, each with a hyperlink to a slide. When the user clicks on one of those shapes, it navigates you to the slide where the knot is in that location. Also notice that in the top left-hand corner, we've saved the state as it was previously through that zoom transition. Things get pretty interesting for the AI. To be sure, a human player still has to click for the AI, just like in Mickey's works, operator still had to pull out a bead of a matchbox because we're not building a PowerPoint to control a mouse just yet. Although, don't give me any ideas. For the AI, there is still a collection of invisible shapes. The difference here is that these shapes blink at semi-random intervals using animations. The other difference between this navigation and the player's navigation is that all the shapes are in the same place, but only one is visible at a given time. This will allow us to set sort of a ground state for the model. When the shapes are randomly blinking, it means that there's an equal amount of them, it means that there's an equal chance for us to click that, which means an equal chance to navigate to a random slide. For illustration purposes, this is what's happening, except in reality, there are a lot more shapes. They're invisible, and they're all in the same location, which is underneath the click to AI move. They're also moving a lot faster. So that's it. Our model consists of 1,830 slides. 301 of those each have an AI making initially a random choice to proceed to the next move, because there's an equal amount of randomly blinking shapes represent an equally random chance to navigate to a particular slide, which has the cross in it. That seems a bit complex, but how can we validate whether what we've done is indeed pave the way for a machine learning model? And to do that, we have to look back at those three key points that I kept hammering on earlier in this talk. First, our test. So given the amount of possible game combinations of Tic Tac Toe and the limited capacity of a lone man's calendar, our test will be, does the AI win in 3 moves? Next is the score. So as I mentioned, the number of winning games is not really evenly distributed amongst the total number of games. So there are far more games which neither the player nor the AI win in 3 moves. So we'll consider 3 different results to the test. Good is that the AI wins, neutral is neither the player nor the AI wins, and bad is the AI loses. And finally, the third component is our punishment and rewards. And this is the fun bit. So this is the bit where the randomly blinking shapes comes into its flourishing. So as I mentioned, the shapes represent the probability that an AI will make a move to a certain part of the board. They're exactly analogous to the colored beads in the matchboxes in Donald Mickey's model. To start with, I've initialized each game state where the AI is going to move to have 10 randomly blinking shapes for each location available for the AI to move on the 3x3 grid. In this example, because there are 7 different locations that the AI could potentially move to, because there's no symmetry or rotational symmetry available to it, there are 10 shapes that represent the chance to move to those locations, which means it's 70 randomly blinking shapes on the screen at one given time. That's the ground truth. And then we run a test. When the AI runs a test, if the result was good, that means that the AI won in the first 3 moves. Then we want to track all of the moves that it took and increase the chance that it's going to make those navigation choices again. Because this represents the best possible sequence of moves the AI could possibly do. It's very rare that anyone would win a game of Tic Tac Toe in the first 3 moves. So when it does, we want to encourage this from happening again and again. We do this by increasing the amount of shapes that navigate to those particular slides. We start at the first one, and then by using the zoom transitions, we back propagate through every single one and add shapes that represent the chance to move to the winning slide. Conversely, let's say we run a test and somewhere along the line it makes a mistake. Maybe it had a chance to win, or maybe it was just making silly moves and the player got in there before it. This represents the worst possible scenario. Maybe it had a chance to win, but regardless, when it's in a similar position, we want less of a chance that's going to make those mistakes and move to the wrong slide. So we take that chance away from it. We do that by removing one navigation shape. So originally, the AI makes random choices about which grid it's going to place it across. And then after successive iterations of training the AI, increasing the chance that it's going to win to winning moves and reducing the chance that it's going to move to losing moves, we'll end up, just like Donald Mickey's matchboxes, with a PowerPoint with only navigational shapes that represent an AI moving to winning states. I've had, this is one example of the AI running its tests. So initially, AI makes a move in a corner and then followed by the player's move. In this case, it's doing pretty well, and the player crucially makes a mistake here. The AI has a chance to win, but if it hasn't seen this location before, it's got a random chance of moving to a subsequent any one of those spots. When the player wins, we want to discourage this from happening again. So we back propagate through every single slide that it was in and reduce the shape that represented the chance to move to that future slide. And then we run it again. This time the AI makes the first move, it's in a corner again. The player makes another move, and now the AI has moved to a different location. Again, it's made itself pretty comfortable. It's almost got 3 in a row, but the player defends itself. Here, the AI makes another mistake. It doesn't successfully block the player from getting 3 in a row. Because that then opens the opportunity for the player to win, we want to discourage this from happening. When it's in the same state, we want less of a chance that it's going to navigate to that slide. So we remove the chance for it to navigate to those slides. I've had some questions about the actual mechanics of this, because I did say that there was no VBA involved. For example, this is a winning state. The AI has moved correctly and it's gotten 3 in a row. What we do is we go back to the state beforehand, because that's the state that represents it's going to move to the winning slide. And we notice every single invisible rectangle that represents a chance to move to the third location, because 1, 2, 3. That's why I created those VBA scripts, because I didn't want to have to label 70 in randomly blinking invisible shapes. We then, like a good little machine learning robot and a good programmer, and copy and paste. So by adding more of those invisible shapes, the next time we're in that slide, we're going to move again. And then we back propagate to the next previous state. And we do it again, and we copy and paste. By doing this successive iterations, we've turned a sequence of slides and animations and shapes into something that can truly learn to play tic-tac-toe without ever programming the rules of tic-tac-toe into the game. But there's probably a question you might be all asking right about now. Why? It's sure enough to say what machine learning is not and break the stigma about how it can be used, but why does an understanding of the fundamentals of machine learning matter, aside from knowledge for knowledge's sake? Clear now, I hope, is the distinction between traditional control logic and the machine learning approach. So the difference suggests a fundamental change in how we conduct an analysis, build automation, and program. And some of the other models that we saw, like predicting a digit based on its darkness or randomly predicting a coin toss, are examples of traditional control programming logic. If this, then that. However, machine learning, if nothing else, is a tool that allows us to move past this constrained test. It's not possible to know every then this, and it's certainly too time-consuming to label every then that. Machine learning allows us to tackle problems that we couldn't possibly know how to tackle, not just predicting digits or analyzing text sentiment, but any process where we can test, score, and provide feedback. All of the maths and code that machine learning developers like me build with are extensions that allow us to achieve these 3 steps in different ways. When I was talking about the neural network, I mentioned the loss function, which sometimes what we use is called cross entropy, which might sound confusing or a bit scary for those who aren't familiar with mathematics, but really it's just a way of comparing one list of numbers with another. A mathematician is using that to give us an example of a test and then a score outside of it, so that we can then inform our punishments and rewards. Sometimes the test isn't so clear, like with the audio transcriptions, or it's really vague about how we're going to score this with the cyber attacks or with healthcare examples. When I talk about building an AI out of PowerPoint, to some people's disappointment, it's not about implementing complex mathematics. It's about learning how we can apply those 3 different steps in whatever way that we can with the tools available to us. And then that enters the field of data scientist. See, it's a data scientist's job to experiment with these different components, different ways that you can score, test, provide punishment or reward. From our humble PowerPoint, data scientists might ask, is there a way that we can reduce the number of slides? Is there another way to increase the chance of moving to the correct slide? Not all models follow this reinforcement loop approach, but the principles remain the same. For clustering, it might be, how can I test if the group of travelers I made to try and promote the best use of our t-shirt sales are the best possible groups, given the information I know about the individuals? Classification and targeted ads. Do I really care about how many potential customers I miss? Or am I only cared about how sure I am the model is pointing our ad to the right potential customer? Following on from experimenting, data scientist also does hyperparameter tuning, which is something I didn't really mention, but hyperparameters are just things that we configure to change a model's behavior outside of what it learns from the data. And the PowerPoint example, it might be changing the amount of initially blinking random shapes or altering how many we give or take to provide a faster outcome to an AI that is trained. See, in the end, machine learning taps into something that we take for granted and applies it in a very programmatic way. Our ability to learn before knowing. If you're interested in a follow-up to any of this, I've put my resources that I mentioned in these slides up here. Please feel free to grab a screenshot, but I'll send them out in the chat soon. Also, you can reach out to me on any of those usual places. I'm still on Twitter, not one of those you left. The best place to reach me probably though is LinkedIn. Name is Brenton Adey, and you can visit the site that I occasionally put all my blogging adventures into. But after all of that, thank you very much. And if anyone's got any question, I'm here. Thank you very much.
Is anyone brave enough? Oh, look, is Amy typing something? That was a wonderful session, Brenton.
Thank you. It's a lot of fun. It's nice to know that all my pain and suffering can be shown in a presentation. Thank you very much, everyone.
I can't wait for next week's session now.
Yes. So next week's session, if you enjoyed all my fancy animations, or it's effectively, so I'm also I got a bachelor as well in neuropsychology and so sort of brain science, brain behavior as well. So I just sort of try to apply those learnings into the ways that I create presentations and stuff like that. So it's just my anecdotal tales about how I like to build these presentations and have fun with it.
Excellent. Oh, okay. Well, anyway, we are just about at time. So hopefully we will see you all next week. And Brenton, this has been marvelous.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.